In this presentation, we'll be looking at design thinking and reflecting on the ideation and prototyping phases. This is a submission for Assessment 3 in the subject. Design thinking is more than a process or a philosophy. It is actually a way of behaving in a complex situation where you have a problem that needs to be resolved, where human-centered considerations are warranted. And these are needed to achieve a reasonable solution for all stakeholders. Human-centric design thinking, I believe, provides not only an iterative process for problem solving, but offers a way of behaving in business situations. Take, for example, in my field of event management as an event professional, and in pedagogy when developing curriculum and engaging with students in the classroom. During this presentation, I'll be reflecting on the knowledge that I have gained and the practical skills that I now have, as well as the level of engagement that was required and a particular disposition that is essential, particularly in the ideation and prototype development stages, when we're addressing the problem statement, and in my case, housing affordability for Australia's youth. It is important to note that there are many design thinking frameworks that exist with slightly different processes that may require different skills and tools to utilize them. The version that we decided to use within our work was the Stanford D-School framework, and this is identified in the graphic on the right, where we have the phases of empathize, synthesize, or as it's defined here as define, ideation, prototype design, and then testing of that prototype. In the empathy phase, we engage with divergent thinking. And again now, during the ideation phase, we have a similar approach with divergent thinking. This means to have an open-minded disposition, and it needs to be maintained throughout this process in particular. Any bias or promoting self-opinion will not bring about a solution that will be befitting for the stakeholders. That type of disposition also opens up for potential ideas that you haven't thought of. Ideas that can then be made into prototypes for testing the stakeholder market to see whether they are of value to resolving the solution. If we critically analyze the ideation stage, like I did, we need to understand whether we have reached all of the primary and secondary stakeholders that are going to be affected by the problem. And more importantly, identifying that we have achieved feedback from them with their potential ideas. Throughout the course, we learned a lot about these different stages from work conducted by the Interaction Design Foundation, as well as IDEO. In these publications, we learnt about the prototype stage as an extremely useful process to identify a working model of the final product that may be used to solve the problem that has been defined. There are two key types of prototypes. One is a low fidelity prototype. So that could be, say, a, 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 a drawing or a cardboard box, or like the little character up here, an image of a particular robotic. You can test the low fidelity version at low cost, which is of great benefit to the designers, before you move on then to a high fidelity prototype, which may be having, in the box scenario, moving from cardboard to stone or another more expensive material, or actually creating a prototype of a robot that actually does function. It's so important that we consider the utility of low fidelity prototypes. And they can also be storyboarding. They could be providing simple concepts that can be put in front of the stakeholders for them to come back with design ideas to enable us to change those prototypes in some way, or to go back to the drawing board and empathize with the stakeholders, or go back to ideation to create more ideas based on the feedback. In the next section, I'm going to be taking you through my reflection on the application of the design thinking frameworks, including contemplation and reflection on topics that classmates had used as their problem statements, and looking at the professional context of design thinking in event management, as well as in pedagogy. The University of Edinburgh identified a framework for reflective practice, and there are 5 R's that they have identified. The first is reporting, next responding, relating, reasoning, and reconstructing. So in the first of these frames, reporting, it's about describing the experience. So what happened? So relating to my project, in this situation, I was involved in sending out a survey to people within the communities, some 250,000 potential members of over 20 community groups. Incredible response, I believe, of 200, with open questions being, or open opportunity for them to respond. The context of my experience was that I was overwhelmed by the content, by the responsiveness, and by the interest, and the level of positivity that came forth from the stakeholders within my community. The next R in the framework is responding. So this is about capturing reactions, initial thoughts, feelings, or observations. Now, I can say at the time I felt that it was a wealth of wonderful information. I was elated. I found that there was a lot of common ground between the respondents and myself. So very positive observations I was seeing through that phase, and I felt that we were moving towards a very positive outcome for the stakeholders. What stood out to me was, unfortunately, the majority of stakeholders who did respond were in a demographic of millennials or older, and there were not enough of the Gen Z youth who would be affected more by housing affordability and who were, in fact, the target audience. The reasoning then is about connecting to the knowledge I already have and thinking and trying to link it to what I've already experienced and what I already know. So in thinking about this, I drew on my knowledge about how to engage with Gen Z from my experience in event management and also in my experience within the classroom. And the fact that emails don't work, telephone calls don't work, using Facebook as well as the main means of getting to those communities may also not have worked. So it begged the question of going back into the ideation phase or back into the empathy phase and trying to find other ways of communicating with that particular Gen Z cohort. Perhaps using more social media, more TikTok, more Instagram, or a different means of communicating. The final R in the framework is about reconstructing. So, what will I do differently next time? How will I apply this learning? So, in the future, it's important that we identify all the stakeholders and how we can best communicate with them. Actually, in this project, I did go back to the empathy phase. I did talk to people about how we could more engage with the youth cohort, and that did then lead to changing the problem statement and changing the prototype, which I'll show you. In my research on reflective practice, I was quite astounded to learn that open mindedness, responsibility, and wholeheartedness were the reflective practice attributes that had been first derived from Dewey in 1910. So this approach has been going on for a century or over a century now. Quite astounding. This particular model by Driscoll is considered a free form reflection. So I've chosen one of the simpler reflection frameworks for the complex project, trying to simplify it as much as I possibly could. The image on the left is from Rolf. Reflecting on the design thinking process, I chose the model from uh, Brown, who is the CEO of IDEO, a leading design thinking organization. And what I did here was I superimposed the Stanford D School um, frames or phases, sorry, above that of Brown, and just looked at where empathize, define, fit in, and ideate. Yes, they have ideation, and then they talk about implementation. Now, the problem with this, and also I believe the problem with the Stanford D School, is that they end at testing or end at implementation. And I strongly believe that there needs to be a evaluation phase written into the design thinking frameworks. Because in this, you need to reflect back on how successful that particular prototype has been, reflect on what internal and external factors have changed over time, maybe look at it no longer is a suitable solution to the original problem. The original problem may have changed, or the solution may no longer fit within the external environment or for the purpose it was initially intended. So we need to have more of an evaluation included in many of these design thinking models. I was particularly impressed with a student colleague in class who had used the De Bono Six Thinking Hats uh, framework for ideation. And I really quite like this because I felt I could have used it myself in my project. Um, he used it for, as can be seen here, veterinary medicine and public health context, looking at community animal health markers in rural areas. Need reliable communication and reporting systems. And so by using the six thinking hats, he went through to look at the white hat, which is collecting all the facts, the red, uh, delineating the feelings and intuition that the cohort had, the black hat, looking at all the challenges and the potential risks of this approach. The yellow hat, looking at the benefits and the opportunities. The green hat, being creative and looking for innovation. And then finally, the blue hat, looking at the planning and the process. And I felt this was a really, really useful way of approaching complex situations by breaking them down, by breaking the process down into these six individual areas and really focusing in those areas to get the ideation working. In my project, we used the Lotus design model to collate all the information that came back from the survey of 200 residents within the Inner West. The open-ended survey provided some valuable insights into the motivations, frustrations, and needs of the stakeholders as residents of the Inner West. And it enabled me to formulate the key areas that needed attention, which were National Affordable Housing Authority, tax reform, collaborative governance, and an advocacy driven by the voting public. Crazy Eight was another ideation tool that was used. So as you can see, it's been graphically displayed as a Lotus diagram again. The fun thing about it was that it was 8 people at a dinner party that I was at who were told the problem of affordable housing needed solutions, and they were given 8 minutes to come up with 8 ideas on how affordable housing could be resolved. Now, the great thing about this is that the process was fun. It was very short. It came up with some great concepts, many of which had already been formulated from the survey. So it was reinforcing much of what the survey was saying. The great thing about Crazy Eight, I believe, is that it enables people to voice their opinions who may not usually do so. So if they are introvert, they're in a perfect environment where they can just write 8 comments without being overshadowed by an extrovert who's taking over the discussion if it is a brainstorming. The other thing is in pedagogy, I believe this is such a valuable, crazy tool that we could use in any group activity or in trying to identify some outcomes in the teaching environment. Thinking what, so what, and now what enabled us to reflect on the complexity of the results that came back from the survey and other ideation processes to formulate in a very simple way a action plan for designing a prototype. On the basis of all the ideation work, we ended up choosing strategy 3 as the prototype design, where we would focus on the housing and rental affordability for the youth, for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that we needed to create a social media platform and a website type of repository to collate all the information coming through from this youth cohort so that it could then be actioned by advocacy groups as the constituents that are going to be most affected by unaffordable housing. In prototype concept design, we looked at Amnesty International and the work that they do through their website and social media, where they consider housing as a human right and have an ability to, on their website, to collate petitions from the audience of human rights activists. Helping us design a website based on the template from Amnesty International, we use the wireframe approach, which is a way of designing prototypes. Now, there are two types of wireframe. One is a low fidelity, and the second is a high fidelity approach. So, this is the low fidelity approach, which is a very quick way of identifying the key elements in your digital design for a web page before actually going on and producing the website. So I have really learned an incredible amount from using the design thinking framework, thinking about the problem statement and identifying in a non-judgmental way how stakeholders may react to it, and then from their feedback, being able to come up with a prototype that we can test. So the design thinking approach really has been an invaluable framework to guide me with the core issues of the affordable housing crisis problem statements. As a complex topic involving multiple problem statements for diverse stakeholders, the framework has enabled me to retain an open minded disposition, to listen and respect all stakeholder opinions. Throughout the ideation phase and prototype testing, I was able to consolidate the learnings and meet the challenge with the proposed alpha mandate to simplify the problem statement and objectives into a manageable solution. A key learning from me is that the success in the design learning framework is contingent on retaining an open minded and empathetic disposition, which allows the flexibility to amend the problem and potentially change the direction, that is, the prototype. On reflection, the knowledge learned will provide me valuable frameworks which I can incorporate into curriculum and classroom engagement for students, my event management professionalism, and in general life skills.